With the NHL constantly talking about expansion and the PWHL expanding to 2 cities, let's talk a little bit about an expansion draft and who the Flames might protect and who they might see walk.
You're Locked On Flames, your daily podcast on the Calgary Flames. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to today's episode of Locked On Flames. As always, I am your host, Jess Belmosto, and thank you so much for joining me. Today, I thought it would be fun to do a hypothetical situation where the Flames have to protect 3 players due to an expansion draft. This is fully inspired by the PWHL's expansion draft as they are expanding to Seattle and Vancouver. And the protection lists were due today. And thank you to Maya Smith for this idea, because I think this would be super interesting. And I think it would be a lot more interesting than, say, the Seattle draft. Make sure you subscribe to Locked On Flames wherever you get your podcast, as well as YouTube. We are here for you Monday through Friday, 5 days a week, your Calgary Flames every day. And let's jump right into this. We constantly hear, oh, NHL is looking to expand back to Atlanta for a 3rd time. Oh, the NHL is looking to bring another team to Texas. Oh, well, maybe Arizona can work after all. So it's very, especially this season, I think it was the forefront of a lot of conversations. And I think that Gary Bettman kind of pokes the fire a little bit when talking about, adding teams and, oh, Atlanta is so nice. And you have, a lot of the trustworthy front-facing presence of hockey media talking about expanding and tweeting eyeball emojis and city skylines and things like that. So, I mean, it's not out of the picture. I would honestly say the next 3 to 5 years, I would expect to see another expansion team. But I think everyone has to remember that Vegas only happened because it was that was a once in a lifetime situation. Teams have learned. But let's talk about the PWHL's expansion and just kind of, lay the groundwork for what this exercise is going to look like. Just like the NHL, the PWHL expansion allows you to protect just 3 players currently on your team under contract for next season. So if they're a pending UFA, like Dan Vladar, you can't protect them. But I think with the Flames, so many of their players have no movement clauses of some sorts that I don't really think, it would matter. I do think, obviously, there were players that they would need to protect, and we're going to talk more about those. But with the Flames, I, again, am going into this with the idea that, okay, they can protect 3 players. Which 3 players don't have a no movement clause? Which 3 players are realistically part of the long-term future? And what makes the most sense as to who to expose to the draft? Because, I mean, at the end of the day, you can try to figure this out. With the PWHL, you only have 6 teams to choose from. In the NHL, you have a lot more teams. So if you're the 33rd team coming in, you have 32 other teams that you can look at and snatch from. So that is a benefit for any NHL expansion team, but especially, I guess, if you're limited to spots that, limited to those 3 spots, but there's still a player on the cusp of, do we want to protect them? Are we sure we want to use one of those spots? Sort of situations. I do think the Flames kind of have an advantage and a disadvantage because, number one, they don't have a ton of overly elite, talented players. And those are the spots that, those are players that are going to take up that spot. But also at the same time, you have a ton of players with no movement clauses. So like Milan Lucic back in the Seattle expansion draft waived his because he was fine if the Flames, it was okay. And I believe Mark Giordano did the same thing. So it didn't, like, there's situations where players are like, okay, yeah, like, that's fine. Like, I'll be fully exposed, even if they have that no movement clause. And I don't believe that would come into play for the Flames, in my opinion. And I think it would be silly, depending on, like, where the team is and things like that. But I would love to see how this plays out in the PWHL. I think truly rosters are just gonna be fully, like, decimated, and there's so much talent, and like Hillary Knight's exposed, Sarah Nurse is exposed, there Brianne Jenner's exposed. Like, there are so many players that could be that, like, were the face of their team or like synonymous with that city and be on the West Coast next season. So it's really cool. I think the Flames have, like, a very obvious answer for one of their spots, but I just love the idea of, like, plotting who could get picked. Why would you protect this player over that player? And at the end of the day, Flames only have 3 spots, just like every other team. So stick around and we will talk about that coming up next. And of course, with the obvious choice, who you'd protect first. Are you looking for a snack that's both delicious and nutritious? Crack into a good source of protein with Wonderful Pistachios. Wonderful Pistachios is one of the highest protein nuts. Each 1 ounce serving has 6 grams of protein, giving you over 10% of your daily value. Plus, they're packed with fiber and better for you unsaturated fats to help keep you feeling fuller longer. I have been loving the no-shell variety, the salt and vinegar flavor. I think that those taste delicious and are the perfect snack. I literally have the bag on my coffee table right now because they are the perfect snack to have while watching television and getting ready for the Stanley Cup final. And of course, you can get snacking and get cracking with the snack that packs a protein punch. Visit wonderfulpistachios.com to learn more. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in to today's episode of Locked On Flames. Make sure you're following me on Twitter and Blue Sky at Jess Belmosto. I mean, the obvious choice here for your first player protected is, of course, Dustin Wolf. He is, like, you just have to protect him. Like, that is an obvious no-brainer. Like, don't even think twice about it. And there's just no way you risk exposing him. Like, you would be so stupid to do that. And I know sometimes we get on Craig Conroy about certain things, but I don't think he's that dumb. I don't think that that's a risk he'd be willing to take. Anyone with a brain, like, you don't have to be overly smart to know that you should take him in an expansion draft. Like, it's very similar to how I felt when people took him in the first round of the fantasy hockey draft that we had this year. And you would just be so smart to take him. He is a Calder Trophy finalist this year, which is super exciting. The Flames aren't necessarily a group of guys that are up for awards all the time. Obviously, like, the Masterson's a given, and then, like, the King Clancy last or 2 or 3 years ago, and then Mangiapane was nominated for it, and Backlund won. And then, like, the Calder, that's an important one to be nominated and selected as a finalist for, I would say. And it's a big, bright future for Dustin Wolf. Should he continue down, like, should he just keep playing the way he's been playing his entire hockey career? He went 29, 16, and 8 this season, which I think is truly impressive considering the defense that was out in front of him and just how brutal it was in the workload he was carrying, and how heavily he had to step up. He almost single-handedly dragged them to a wild card spot. So, a guy like that, you can't just say toodaloo to. That's a guy you want on your team for a very long time. And it's not something you want to risk because, like I said before, anyone with a brain would know that that's who you have to take. And to be entirely honest, so much of your future rides on him that it just does not seem worth the risk. It is a high risk, probably a very low, minuscule, microscopic reward situation here. And I think with Dustin Wolf, you are really, and goaltending can be so finicky. Like, this is not, not rocket science there. We know that things kind of ebb and flow, and, Jacob Markstrom was a great example of a pattern that you see with goaltending. So good season, bad season, good season, bad season, good season, bad season, good season. Okay, so going into the next season, probably gonna be a bad season. So, or tough goaltending season, I should say. So even though he does not have a track record really in the NHL, just don't risk it. And then I think your other player here is Zane Parekh. I know these probably aren't the names that you expected, but those names are because they have a full no movement clause, a full no trade clause. Like, there's no way that they can be exposed if they're on this 3 list or not. So Zane Parekh is a huge part of your future as well. And I think it just makes sense. You don't want to risk losing him. He is a fantastic right-handed defenseman that will likely be playing top 4 minutes for your team in the near to distant future. I think it's going to be sooner rather than later. I think that he will play a few games with the Flames to start the season. And if he doesn't make it out of camp, I think it's going to be one of those Mackenzie Weegar, Matt Coronado situations where, he gets called up and should be sent back down if, things aren't necessarily jiving. But I think it is so easy to make these moves when most of your team has no move clauses. If you look, if Dustin Wolf, even if Wolf was in the middle of a 5-year contract and he had only a no movement clause the last 2 years of his contract, I would still protect him. I don't care. Or, what if he didn't have that? Then I don't know who I would protect over him, Parekh, in my third player. Maybe I don't think Connor Zary would be one of those players either, and that's not a knock on him. I mean, if I had to, it would probably be him or Morgan Frost. But the Flames don't necessarily have a lot of choices, and they don't have a lot of easy choices besides like the ones that I've named so far. And I think, oh, why haven't you said Mackenzie Weegar? Well, guess what? Because he has no trade clause. There's no, you're not moving him. And if that were a question, then yeah, I would flick probably Parekh off the list and say, okay, Mackenzie Weegar, you're on it, because we know how badly teams need right-handed defensemen. So, I mean, or thank God I'm not a general manager, because I feel like I've just opened up a ginormous can of worms that I don't want to play with. I would like to put the lid back on, seal it shut, and put it back on the shelf. I think that would be the most ideal situation. And obviously, like, this isn't going by the official rule book of an expansion draft. This is just, lighthearted conversations for the first week of June when the Flames haven't played hockey in well over a month. So I think in order to protect this up-and-coming core, this up-and-coming young guns situation you got going on here, the first two players you're protecting are Dustin Wolf and Zayden Parekh. Wolf, like, you don't have another goaltender that can do what Wolf can do. And Zayden Parekh, yeah, sure, he's had one NHL game. But again, his pedigree says a lot. And I'm willing to watch him grow into an NHLer than risk losing a fantastic right-handed defenseman who was setting records left and right in the OHL this past season. And coming up next, I am going to talk about my third player we are protecting, and some players that I think if you leave them exposed, they are likely getting picked. And maybe that this is just my bias. Thanks, everyone, for tuning in and making the show part of your day. Make sure you're following wherever you get your podcasts, as well as YouTube. We're here for you Monday through Friday, 5 days a week. Your Calgary Flames every day. And my third player is Matt Coronado. Why? Because he does not have a no movement clause until year 6 and 7 of this new contract. Otherwise, it is free game. You just signed him. He is a 20-plus goal scorer. And he is growing into a top 6 forward. I think that he has really he came light years in a matter of 82 games from, the 4 he missed at the start of the season to the 2 he missed when he was down with the Wranglers to, skyrocketing back up. 24 goal season is nothing to sneeze at. He worked hard. He came in to this season, obviously wanting that roster spot. He is someone that clearly Craig Conroy believes in and wants to build around and build as part of this group. And I don't blame him. I think having a player like him that's as young and energized and just someone that can put up 20 plus goals, that's what the Flames need. The Flames can't afford another middle 6 forward that they expect to play up in the lineup. They need some real shooting talent, some real scoring talent, and you would be sorely mistaken if you left Coronado unprotected, in my humble opinion. I think that Coronado brings something to the lineup that the Flames have been sorely missing. I think that they have a bright future ahead of them should they obviously keep him around and they build obviously add complementary pieces. I think that makes the most sense. I'm not really interested in rushing through this transitional period. I think the Flames need to play it safe and play it smart, but also still be aggressive. So I think that Coronado is part of your core group moving forward, and you don't necessarily have a player on the team that can replicate the same things that he did this season. And, well, someone has to score those goals. Coronado was part of the Flames' top scorers this year. It was Kadri, Huberdeau, and Coronado. So 2 out of the 3, I don't really think anyone saw coming. So it would be nice to keep him around. I think that he has just a lot of ability, and we can probably see him blossom even further over these next few years. And I think once he refines his shooting and Craig Conroy continues to get his hands on some young centers, that would be really nice to see some complementary pieces added for him, as well as this next wave of players coming through. And obviously, with an expansion draft, you have to consider who might be claimed. Honestly, one of my first thoughts was Connor Zary and Martin Pospisil. I think Martin Pospisil is a player that would round out a bottom six, probably fourth line very nicely, especially if you can just like hand pick and build from scratch. Obviously, you have this new generation of fourth liners and bottom six players and a new role. It's not just your veteran forward that you sign on July 1st for a league minimum or the veteran minimum. They have a job out there. They definitely have a much more defensive role. And heck, sure, they're not necessarily out there scoring 10 goals combined all season, but having a nice finishing touch like that is a good touch to your fourth line. And Pospisil does bring a physical aspect to his game. We have seen that. We have seen him suspended. We have seen him compared to Matt Rempe. And they both do play a similar game in terms of towing that fine line and walking right on the edge. I think Pospisil would probably be better fit for a role like that, just because, again, the Flames have so many forwards that they don't know what to do with, and unfortunately you have to get rid of them somehow. And an expansion draft would probably be one of the ways. But outside of Pospisil, I do see Connor Zary potentially being exposed. He's technically not under contract right now. Like, yeah, he's an RFA, but he doesn't have a contract for next season. Zary is a versatile player that I think a lot of teams could benefit from. I think he could be a nice middle six forward or center, depending on where he is. And I think that's part of the problem with the Flames is they just have so many pieces that they don't know what to do with them. And I mentioned it a few times during the season, but Connor Zary not playing at center is such a missed opportunity. I think that regardless of what this next contract looks like, they need to pick a role and stick with it. He should be starting at center the majority of nights, unless something happens and he needs to fill in on the wing, or vice versa. I think you're kind of dipping your toes back into the Sam Bennett water where your player doesn't have a definitive role. You're misusing them. You're playing them down in the lineup. Their minutes aren't up. You're not allowing them the opportunity to show you who they are as a player and to maybe use them in different ways or, different responsibilities. It stinks because Zary is a good player, but he has had a handful of injuries that, are a cause for concern, especially after injuring this same knee twice. I would certainly hope that he is resting and making the most of his off season in a rehabilitation way. But if it came to an expansion draft, I'm not necessarily going like today. I would not fret if Connor Zary was maybe left exposed. Not because he's a bad player or anything like that. I think he's a good player that the Flames should probably work into this next group. But based on what the lines are today, I think there would be better options for Team 33 to get outside of Zary. I would love to see Zary stay a Flame, but I want to see him healthy. I want to see him consistently productive. And I want more of that. I think he's a great net front presence. I think he'd be great on the power play. It's just a matter of like the expansion team building out their bottom six. but to me, Pospisil would be a perfect fit for your bottom six, for your bottom line, fourth line. I'm going to be real honest, for your fourth line. I think it just makes a lot more sense. Also, Ryan Lomberg could be exposed too. He's shown that but knowing the Flames and knowing how heavy they are on Ryan Lomberg in culture, I think they would end up protecting him. And it wouldn't be the smartest move, but I don't know. The Flames are the Flames. Craig Conroy is a very different manager than Brad Treliving, but at the end of the day, we know who is calling the shots. And Matt Coronado is just the third player for me to protect. I think it is way too risky. I think he still has a very high ceiling. And you got to keep this development going and keep him trending upwards. And hopefully, hopefully your team doesn't get crushed too much. But that'll do it for me here on today's episode of Locked On Flames. Thank you all so much for joining me. I hope you have a fantastic evening. And if you are in the area of the wildfires, I hope you are staying safe. And if there are any donation, like charities or anything like that, that are foundations that are looking for donations, things like that, feel free to send them to me over on Twitter at JessBelmosto or the comments on YouTube. Make sure you're subscribed wherever you get your podcasts, as well as YouTube. We are here for you Monday through Friday, 5 days a week. Your Calgary Flames every day. And I will see you next time. Tomorrow, we're talking some controversial topics with one of my favorite writers in the Flames sphere, James Johnson.